Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why drivers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Most people don't realize how much of their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making billions pulling details about you from public records and the internet, then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance. All backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might just sell credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of that together at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/prevent. Protect yourself now at aura.com/prevent.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. And welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Samira Ahmed, who is a broadcaster, writer. Needs no introduction, I think the phrase is, Samira. Isn't that right?
Oh, I don't know about that. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really glad to be here.
She has written very recently BFI Classics, one of those beautiful books that I remember when I was studying at Liverpool University. I used to sneak off and find the film section and spend afternoons just reading through Adrian Martin's Once Upon a Time in Camilla Paria's The Birds and just go through those. So it's absolutely wonderful little books. I love them. And your film is Hard Day's Night, the Richard Lester film of the Beatles. What was why this particular film?
Well, for a start, I was amazed to discover no one had already commissioned it, because I think it is a major classic of all cinema. And people may know I've been writing and reading a lot and thinking a lot about the Beatles in recent years, because I discovered the earliest complete UK concert recording, the Stowe tape, which became quite a big news story. And one of the things that hit me about that and the impact it had on listeners was, one, it became the most downloaded episode ever of Front Row. And a lot of people got in touch who said they weren't particularly Beatles fans, but they really loved the story because it took them into what was going on in Britain in 1963. And I realised that that's how I wanted to approach A Hard Day's Night, a film that I had watched repeatedly from the age of 11 when it was first shown on, first shown in my lifetime really on British television, and my brother taped it off television, so we had it on video to watch repeatedly. So I watched it every week for a really long time at the age of 11. Which I think is quite a key thing. That was a child, and you kind of introduced to them as a gang of schoolboy-like young men who make you feel part of their gang. I discovered the music through the films, and I realised that there was a story to be told about the film, not just as the Beatles or a piece of cinema, but as a social history. You know, what was going on in Britain, what's going on with Richard Lester and these filmmakers who are taking the Nouvelle Vague ideas and are Americans who work in advertising and television, what's going on in television culture in Britain, and what's going on politically too, and put them all together, and then casting ahead to how this film changes the way pop music works, how it invents the pop video, how the Monkees become possible, and trying to find its descendants into the modern era with films like Kneecap. And then looking at things that I've always felt were undervalued, which is looking at things like the women characters in the film who are so interesting in their own right. So I did all that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really is a sort of matrix of loads of different things colliding. I mean, there's even a sense of documentary in there for the very first view of them sort of running. It reminds me of the Don't Look Now Dylan film as well. And the sight of, I love the comment you make about George Harrison sort of falling over and hurting his wrist.
Yeah, because people think, oh, ha ha, they fall over and then they get up and run off. But it's a really hard fall. And I rewatched that film so often, freeze framing it for this book. And he gets up, and Ringo falls on top of him for a start. He gets up, and as he's running, he's kind of smiling, but he looks down at his wrist, starts to rub it. You know that must have hurt. And then, of course, in those first few seconds of that opening sequence, the number of children and fans who just take real tumble and, they're going under the juggernaut or there's legs running over them. I mean, it's pretty merciless.
It's like something, yeah. It's like something out of a horror movie, really, like a zombie film or sort of. Especially these more recent ones, the rage films.
It's funny because I remember reading Kim Newman wrote a review of the DVD re-release for the 60th anniversary in Sight and Sound just shortly before my book came out, and he saw the whole film. You could see it all through the eyes of as a horror movie. And actually, I do make comparisons of my book to films like The Day the Earth Caught Fire, and this idea of pop culture as this horror phenomenon for adults who are, these children have been taken over by screaming and they've been possessed in some way. So it's quite fun. You can see all that in there too.
I'm really interested in this relationship that we used to have with cinema. I wonder if sort of 11-year-olds have that same relationship where you do watch a videotape that an older sibling has introduced you to over and over and over again. I mean, I can even remember the sort of spines of the VHSs with my Lord of the Rings, written on it in felt tip. I'm referring to the cartoon version from the 80s, obviously, not the Peter Jackson one.
That's a really good question because my children who are in their 20s now, I raised them on a lot of videos and DVDs. I was quite wary of a lot of children's television. So I raised them on the box set of things like, Bagpuss or Pipkins. And I think a lot of children do still grow up with that sense of favourite shows that they watch again and again. And in fact, I even remember in the 90s and the early 2000s, they used to release so-called treat-sized videos, a bit like, otherwise you'd scoff a giant bar of chocolate. They'd release short things. They only had 3 episodes of Thomas the Tank Engine so that your child could put in the DVD, but they couldn't get any more than 3 episodes out of it. So there's always a sense, isn't there, of social media addiction being anticipated, I think, with any form of media. So I'm not quite sure. I do know that book signings and screenings I do with the film, about a third of the audience are usually people under 30, a lot of 20-somethings, and even some teenagers who've discovered the film, sometimes introduced by their parents, sometimes actually not so. They've discovered the music themselves through Spotify or streaming service, and they're curious, and then they discover the films and they fall in love with them. I think what's really interesting is they still have the same impact on young people that they always did. Doesn't matter when you discover them. And I think part of the power of this particular film is it is timeless in a way that Help, although it's great fun, and as a child I think I probably loved it more. It's more of a childlike cartoon, whereas A Hard Day's Night, it is more, as you say, of a documentary. It's more sophisticated. And even if you've never seen a Nouvelle Vague film, you're actually being exposed to Nouvelle Vague ideas through this film. So I think it appeals more to, it takes you from childhood into your young adulthood and beyond, and it holds you. That's its power.
Let's think a little bit about the people behind the movie. Richard Lester has come from has he come from the States or is he Canadian?
No, he's come from the States. So I think he was originally from Philadelphia, and he'd studied psychology at university and was horrified at how, in those days, this was in the 50s, because he was 10 years older than the Beatles, how you were encouraged to medicalise and basically section children on the basis of fixed tests. This was the era of, they've got that condition, lock them up in a home, in an institution. And he was horrified by that. And I think it also reveals his instinctive connection with young people and his sympathies with them at a time when a lot of exploitation cinema was making films about young people in a slightly horrified way. Even films like, is it The Wild Ones, the one with Marlon Brando? There's a sense of horror, isn't there, to it? And obviously films like Reefer Madness going back decades, and he's very much on the side of the kids, I think. So he came to Britain in the 50s and did a combination of making a lot of adverts, which a lot of people did and still do to make money, which gave him a huge amount of experience with different kinds of filming techniques and budgets and getting effects. But he also made TV comedies, especially with Spike Milligan and Peter Sellers. So he had this real affinity with the Goons, with that kind of very British sense of humour. And he made 2 shows for ITV in its early days, a show called Fred and Son of Fred, written by Spike Milligan, which are amazing. They're fourth wall breaking. They are, Monty Python, everything. The seeds of those shows are sown in this. And you think it's being made only a year after ITV launches. And we worked out that the very first series wasn't ever shown in the Liverpool region, but the second series was, which actually got cancelled mid-run because ITV just thought it was too strange and disturbing or weird. But it was great fun, and a lot of elements of it, even literal jokes from it, are transcribed into A Hard Day's Night. There's a scene where George is drawing face on a human face on a monitor, on a TV monitor. And there's a scene like that I actually managed to match individual sketches, just visual puns and ideas that Richard Lester had and carried in his head and would put into different films, which is very much his style. So he has a very British sense of humour. It's an outsider sense of humour in the sense that they're anti-authority. That's what bonds him with Spike Milligan. And I think that's key to understanding how American, like him, could capture such a British phenomenon and make it just sort of emphasise its Britishness, but also emphasise its weirdness with surreal comedy. And the other 2 producers, Bud Ornstein and Walter Shenson, also North Americans. I know Walter in particular, I think also Bud were both based in the UK. So they're Americans living in London. And there's always something that we love, don't they, about Americans choosing to live in this country, which I find very exciting.
Terry Gilliam from Monty Python. And,
Mike Mickey Dolenz from the Monkees making Metal Mickey. Yeah, and the original stage production of Bugsy Malone, that was Mickey Dolenz.
Yeah, it's a funny. I don't know. Yeah, I always think that. I remember talking to a really. I won't name the person, but a famous American director, and I told him where I was from, and he said, "Oh, how romantic!" And I was thinking, Barrow in Furness, romantic, and it's just like, to an American, that's really romantic for some reason. But
Well, I do know that even coming from Liverpool would be very exciting to Americans. I mean, that was one of the things that the Beatles did. They made to be British, and that's what I talk about in the book. This film makes Britain seem like the most exciting place in the world to be. You don't need to go to the Greece or the south of France like Cliff Richard or the Canary Islands, A Wonderful Life, to show that you're doing something exotic. Britain is the place you want to be. That's the epicentre of world culture. That's amazing, isn't it? In 1964, in black and white, you're not even sure if the sun is shining. It's all grey, and yet that film is fused with light and energy and excitement.
And it all looks like sort of cigarette ash at times.
It does.
But, that's one of the other things that struck me reading the book was the idea as well that the Beatles themselves, they sort of needed some convincing to do the film, but they sort of grow into the film. They at the very beginning, they're very nervous and they're not quite sure how much they need to act. And they criticise the early sort of scenes that they're not very, they're kind of embarrassed about. But watching it, it almost adds to the charm.
I agree. I said the film was shot in more or less in chronological order. It starts with the sequences on the train, and they felt very awkward and uncomfortable. But I think it adds that sense of, we're getting to meet them, they're getting to meet each other through the screen. I was listening to an interview Ringo did shortly after filming finished, just this morning actually, re-listening to it. And he talked about how hard it was for them not to look at the camera, because if you think about all their experiences with television, with news conferences, it was all you completely address the camera directly, you break the fourth wall all the time, you make jokes, you play. And here suddenly they can't look at the camera. They can muck around a bit, but not looking at the camera, which is the opposite of what they are. They've always been fourth wall breakers. So I can see why that took some adjustment. And certainly if you watch, it was called Yeah, 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 the Granada documentary footage about their first American visit, where they went on the Ed Sullivan Show, which was filmed by the Maysles brothers. And Disney re-edited all the original footage as Beatles 64, which you can watch. And I re-watched it. And it's so interesting because it's shot just a couple of weeks, like literally a month before they start shooting A Hard Day's Night. Some of the sequences are almost identical. They're on train, they're in a news conference, they're negotiating a TV show, they're trying to go to a nightclub and they're being refused. They want to go, George has an invitation to the Playboy Club, so can't we go, we've got a VIP ticket. They sneak out and they go to a nightclub where they're dancing with girls. All these things that we see happening in A Hard Day's Night. Actually, in the documentary, Paul in particular is constantly playfully dressing the camera, putting on silly voices. And I think in a weird way, the film, I could see why they felt the Hard Day's Night almost captured a muted version of them, because the real thing is even more energetic. But that's not to say that I still think A Hard Day's Night is a masterpiece, but that's partly because of the whole production of it, the invention of the pop video, the musical treatments, the surreal elements, which a straight documentary wouldn't have. But it has so much documentary-like feel. There's a lot of points where the natural sound is allowed to run, and you just hear the screaming of girls. There's this repeated event throughout the film, and you recognise it when you start to hear it in the distance. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, and well, let's talk about the music. I mean, it's kind of interesting that we've been talking for a while now, and we've very briefly mentioned the music. Of course, it starts with a wonderful, that wonderful chord that everybody who doesn't know how to play the guitar still knows how to play, because it's kind of like just bashing the open strings of the guitar and getting. I
don't think it is, though, is it? I mean, if you read my book, it does name the chord, and it gives a citation to the Ian MacDonald book.
Oh, does it? Well,
yeah, yes, everything is cited. It's not an open chord.
Oh, is it? Oh, bugger. Oh,
no, no. It's much more complicated than that. And also, if you listen to some of the alternative versions on the anthology, you can hear them experimenting with slightly different variants on it.
You see, that's my punkish background, where I would just hit an open chord and that would do. But let's talk about the music. As you've mentioned already, the film sort of treats the music sometimes as overlays it as a soundtrack. Sometimes it invents the pop video that we know today. There's this kind of it lays the inspiration for many a pop video, and kind of changes the way music is addressed in cinema.
Absolutely. So it's been pointed out by, I think, the assistant editor on the DVD extra when I was watching it, who said that John Jimpson's edit of I Should Have Known Better, which is the first song you see them singing on the train carriage when they're in the kind of guard's carriage. It's actually a revolutionary moment in cinema where you start to hear the song before you see anyone performing it. And actually, as you watch, they're playing a game of cards. The music starts up. Paul starts tapping his feet and he starts humming and shaking his head like it's come on in the radio, like the soundtrack has come on around them. And then suddenly it cuts to them in the same positions and they're playing instruments. And we take it for granted now. Pop videos do that all the time, where you jump between performance and some kind of more stylized scenario. And I think I call it, I had to give names to these pop videos formats for the book. They said, you've got to name them. So I said, okay, well, this is the dual performance scenario, because there's two different scenarios and it jumps between them. And the editing matches things like, as he throws down a card, there's the beat matches it. So no one had ever edited or presented performance. Either you saw a band playing because they were at a gig, or they're in the background to a scene at a nightclub or something. But to actually see the whole scene constructed around that song, so that the song is the most important factor. No one had ever done that before, and that is remarkable. And I love things like, if you think about the Robert Freeman cover to the With the Beatles album, which I often think is a visual reference throughout this film, and he obviously did the famous opening, the end titles and those lovely photographs, those headshots. There's a scene in this song where they're playing, and you get these close-ups of their heads with fire buckets and broom handles rattling behind them. Just the strange contradiction of these beautiful, famous faces next to the detritus of cleaning. Close-ups on George Harrison's amazing eyebrows, or kind of Paul's chin or John's nose. And I just think almost as deconstructing their faces that close up. Again, we just watch it, we think this is beautiful. We don't think about how stylistically original this was. And again, we take it all for granted. And I will point out, which I think is hilarious, that having been given a Vanguard Award by MTV in 1984 as the father of the pop video and disputing the paternity of it, which is kind of Richard Lester's jokey style, MTV is basically dying now. I mean, they've closed down all their channels in Europe. I don't know how long it'll survive. But this film has outlasted the format it even invented.
That's astonishing. That's absolutely astonishing.
I mean, they still make pop videos, but they don't have a channel of their own anymore, really, do they?
There was ossification in that sort of format that you talk about. I remember all those sort of boy group, girl group videos where there would be the evening singing and the on the beach singing. Yes. And it was basically a sort of form of the Mr. or Miss Universe competition, where you would have a swimwear version and a evening wear version of the same song. That's quite a fun way of seeing it, yeah. And then later on, of course, we think about Help, which I kind of do look ahead to, because that does have, again, really original treatments of music songs. Basically, Duran Duran and the 80s excess video of exotic locations. I mean, Rio, and they all come back to Help, where they're shooting on the beach with those girls. The sunlight is dappled through those different
sort of there's different ruins and outdoor locations, and even in the studio where they are recording a song, and it's got cigarette smoke filtering through those beautiful coloured spotlights. I mean, the interesting thing is watching these films as a child, you often get bored and you think, I'll forward through the songs. You never, ever wanted to forward through any of these Beatles songs, because the treatment, the visual treatment, was as beautiful as the song itself. The two made each other even greater. And I think that's part of Richard Lester's power. He doesn't just invent the pop video, he makes it, he masters the format, and he sets down the templates for generations to come of how you treat pop music, how you treat it with respect, and you treat it as a thing of beauty.
Isn't it also because, and this will probably go on to what we're going to talk about next, but isn't it also because that instead of the music being a sort of suspension of the narrative or suspension of the depiction of the characters, it's actually a further expression, if not the apex, of how those characters work together, how they combine and become sort of the emergent property that is the Beatles?
It's interesting. People often talk about, in a traditional musical, the songs are supposed to take on the action. They're part of the storytelling. And Hard Day's Night defies that. It's not really a pop musical because they're breaking into song in a professional context. They're doing a rehearsal or they're doing a performance. And so in a weird way, it doesn't take on the story. And yet, you're right, it's sense of it, it's the only moment in which they're truly free in the film is when they're performing. And when they're doing some of those rehearsals, like If I Fell, when they just pick up the drumsticks and they just start to play for each other and to cheer up Ringo. And they're all looking at each other and they're all in the round, they're facing inwards and people are walking around outside around them with the cameras and sweeping the studio floor. You have this sense that this is their freedom, this is who they are, this is what the Beatles live for, it's their music and the performance. So it sort of subverts the idea of the traditional musical because it doesn't really drive the story forward, and yet it's essential to understanding who they are, and it's why we've come to the cinema, is we want to see the band whose music we love.
Yeah, it's kind of like the circling of the wagons of the gang. You know, this is a film about a gang to some extent. And the story of the film, although it's quite a loose story, but the story of the film is about the threat of that gang coming apart, perhaps.
Yeah, although the threat is sort of, again, it's sort of a surreal joke, isn't it? The idea of Ringo goes off and suddenly without the four of them, you are nobody. I love that Ringo puts on a hat and a coat and suddenly he's unrecognisable and no girl wants to go out with him. Get out of it, shorty. I just think that's hilarious. And, how many pop bands would really have been happy to have themselves portrayed that way? So it plays very quickly, it starts playing with the idea of the fame, the fourness of the Fab. That they are, this idea of them as a multi-headed beast. I mean, a nice beast, but I think it's incredibly sophisticated in that way. But it does it in a very throwaway, light-handed way. It's not, it's not overly heavy-handed at all, and you can see or not see it. I mean, other thing I love is the whole sequence on this riverside with David Janssen, the boy. I think that's like science fiction. I mean, most obviously it looks like kitchen sink drama. It's very British social realism. It's like Murray Melvin, Rita Tushingham walking along the canal, but no one's pregnant in this scenario. But the boys run away from home. I mean, it is quite dark. But really what you think is, hang on, it's Ringo encountering his childhood self. And there's even 4 of them in his own gang he describes, and each of them, if you listen to the description, matches a Beatle. So there's a whole science fiction version. This is the bit of the film where it becomes an episode of Doctor Who, or Tarkovsky, isn't it? It's like Solaris.
Wow. I mean, and there's also another surreal element, I guess, is Paul's granddad, who is played by Wilfred Bramble, who would be famous at the time as the elder Steptoe from Steptoe and Son. Yeah, a joke that's kind of lost if you don't know that, because he's constantly described as a clean old man, and of course in that.
I mean, I put it in the book. I didn't get the joke.
Oh, yeah. Oh, right, really?
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, it's weird because I was sort of aware Steptoe and Son was on the show. I didn't put the two together for some years. But I got the idea of he's not a dirty old man. But actually, if you think about it, the first thing you see him doing is reading Men Only at the station. So I deliberately talk about the fact that, like all the American viewers and international viewers, I wouldn't have quite got that joke. But it doesn't really matter. It adds to that sense of... that's why it works today, because it just seems like an odd thing. Whereas at the time, it was a very specific reference for those in the know. And obviously, the whole sense of the collision of two cultures. You've got the biggest pop band in the world colliding with the biggest sitcom star on British television. And there's a sense of them It's like that film Blazing Saddles, when they're all going through the different film sets, aren't they? In the big chase at the end, they run into a big Hollywood musical, and it's a Western crashing into it. There's that sense of genres crashing into each other on the screen, which is, again, very Spike Milligan, very show called Fred, fourth wall breaking, genre defying, confronting the audience, letting the audience in on the joke, if you're in the know. And the film is peppered with other references like that. I mean, the Miss World, Rosemary Franklin, she'd been a British Miss World only a couple of years earlier. She's in it as one of the featured showgirls. So people would have recognised her at the time. I didn't. I mean, as part of my research, I realised who all these people were. And it's quite fun then seeing, this is how the film lands in 1964, where it's saying, look, everyone wants to be in the orbit of the Beatles, and you pepper the film. Like Spice World 30 years later is peppered with, Richard E. Grant or Meatloaf or whoever who want to be in the orbit of the Spice Girls,
Yes. I mean, you have that behind the scenes thing. I mean, it's interesting, that reference to Blazing Saddles as well. They sort of go through the commissary of the studio and the behind the scenes and everything.
Yes. He did that in It's Trad Dad. Have you seen It's Trad Dad? It was his first feature, 62. And it's an odd film, but it's notable for two things. One is the whole thing is it's a young boy and a girl running around a studio set trying to get their favourite acts to agree to put on a concert to save their favourite coffee bar. It's a very Cliff Richard plot. But one, you get all the musical treatments of so many big trad jazz bands in that film, and he runs through the studio, the camera is following them through the studio, crashing into these different things, and you have the sense of them breaking all the genres. Like they walk into a TV studio where there's a current affairs show, and they're all shouting at each other, all these politicians, and then someone gets out a mallet and they start whacking each other over the head. They start physically attacking each other, which is kind of the logical surreal extension, isn't it, of something like Question Time Today. So he's already playing with all these ideas of surreality and comedy in a kind of taking real world things and crashing them into each other, like Blazing Saddles.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got like Victor Spinetti, who's sort of a familiar face from he sort of pops up in loads of films around about this period as well, playing a sort of TV producer putting on a special. So you have this sort of strange where you're seeing around the sides of the Beatles, and as you say, the people in their orbit.
Yeah, I love that idea. And one of the things I noticed in the book, and I chose all the photographs of the book. There's a lot of stills from the film and some sort of set photographs taken by a photographer. But there's a great moment when they first come out of the press conference and they see their set and they run down from the circle to go onto the set and they run through this gallery. And if you look, you spot there's Victor Spinetti and the assistant sitting there, but you haven't been introduced to them. And it's, again, a lovely touch that they run through it onto the set. And then Victor Spinetti comes up some minutes later to introduce himself, and they have that whole kind of standoff. So the film breaks all the rules of even how you introduce new characters. You never quite know who you're going to see next, or if you've already seen them, or you have that sense the camera's almost following the Beatles, even though obviously it's all scripted. You have the sense that the camera's following the Beatles as they kind of go off on their own, and it's trying to keep up with them.
I think that goes to the documentary element as well, where a documentary wouldn't necessarily introduce the character. It would just the person would be foregrounded as they came into the action. I'm really interested. I read Steven Soderbergh's book on Richard Lester,
Getting Away with It.
Yes, it's such a fascinating book, and his conversations about Hard Day's Night are so fascinating, which he obviously rates very highly.
Yeah, well, I quote from it a lot in the book, actually. It's quite a key citation, yeah.
Yeah. And I just think that again, we've talked about how influential the film is in terms of music videos, but it's kind of influential in terms of cinema as well, and British cinema in particular.
Totally. I mean, you think about any film that's made since about a pop band, it's casting a long shadow over them all, and they're all referencing back. Some of them are terrible quickies, which they think they're in the shadow of it in a positive way, and they're not. So I was always amazed at how many terrible films were being made, like The Ghost Goes Gear with the Spencer Davis Group. I couldn't believe what I read about that film. I haven't seen it yet, but I read an interview with the surviving members of the band in Mojo recently, and they talked about it. And they've got Nicholas Parsons. He's obviously the sort of nominally the Victor Spinetti type character, but that's, you've got to have more than comedy actors. You've got to have a script and a structure that works, that isn't embarrassing. But then you get things like Slade in Flame, where Noddy Holder told me, which again it's in the book, that he wanted, Chaz Chandler, their manager, wanted a Hard Day's Night style romp. And this is around the time that, they sort of have had some of their biggest hits. And instead, they agree a script which is much darker. It's based on things that had happened to them or to other acts, like the bit where Noddy Holder's trapped in the coffin, which is on fire, which had really happened to Screaming Lord Sutch, and there's the threat of gangsters and violence and all the rest of it. And it's such a bleak film. I mean, it's now regarded as a masterpiece, but you can see why it failed on release, because teenage girls were not particularly going to find this a fun watch. But that film is created very much in deliberate defiance of the Hard Day's Night formula. So, whether you try to make a film like it or you try to make a film against it, that's still the film you're always comparing yourself to if you're making a film about pop music.
One of the films, in terms of how you film music being made by a group of people, this is not a controversial choice whatsoever, I don't think. Stop Making Sense, a Jonathan Demme film of Talking Heads, I think manages to encapsulate that dynamic of performance as relationships, so people looking at each other. Kind of sadly ironic given the situation with Talking Heads today, but I often think of that film as well in terms of the Beatles, in the sense that you see the construction of the band and you see them how they express themselves and make sense together musically.
Interesting. I'll have to confess I haven't seen that film, so I'll take your word for it, but I wouldn't be remotely surprised. No, I'm not saying there's still a long list of things I need to complete. Some of the films that I was more interested in were ones which, going back to my whole obsession with social history and social change through pop culture, are the films that seem more contemporary and reveal something. So Peter Watkins' Privilege, starring Paul Jones, which is, I've described it as, if you think about the upside down in Stranger Things, it is the upside down of A Hard Day's Night. It's very dystopian. There's an entire scene in it set in a kind of boardroom, which is a bit like the advertising scene, where they are literally saying, right, this is what young people will be wearing in 6 months. And it's obviously all about, Peter Watkins was a very political, radical filmmaker, and it's very much his political views of things. But it's a masterpiece, and so I have quite a long section looking at how that film is influenced by Hard Day's Night, and how you can make a radical film about pop music and media manipulation and brainwashing as a capitalist. As a kind of as a sin of capitalism rather than a sin of communism, which is how Americans were terrified that the Beatles were somehow symbolic of communist brainwashing. I don't know quite why. There's a whole book that I found about how the Beatles were basically a kind of communist plot to brainwash American teenagers. But you can see it the other way too. So I find things like that quite interesting. The sort of idea of, can you make dystopian science fiction out of the Beatles? And you can.
Yeah, well, as you say, it's sort of there in embryonic form in the scenes of people screaming and running after the band at the beginning.
And I should say, and again, it's in the book, Gilbert Taylor, the cinematographer, who was such a renowned cinematographer, refused to work on Help because he said he was so disturbed by the hysteria that his cameras witnessed, and he felt to some extent encouraged by being there. He felt morally horrified at what he'd witnessed. And one of the camera operators had to go to the dentist in agony because the resonance of the screaming rattled all the amalgam in his fillings. And these things really happened.
That's crazy, because on one side you want to dismiss that sort of moral panic as a kind of generational misunderstanding, but on the other you want to say, well, this was really terrifyingly new, and for some people this was the end of the system as they knew it.
I don't know how you feel about fat and hysteria. I have never really understood it, and what I've not written a book about fandom. I did interview two of the girls who were in the concert sequence, which was really lovely and insightful about what the experience was like for them and all the rest of it. But this phenomenon which continues to exist of, people congregating in huge groups obsessively, and there being a kind of a group contagion about screaming. I went to the odd concert with a friend when I was a young teenager, and I just remember looking around and thinking, this isn't me. I can't just join in. I remember once trying to join in with some screaming and just realising, no, can't do it. So I've always felt a bit of an outsider to that kind of group dynamic, which is, that's one of the reasons I don't do big festivals. That's not about screaming, that's about being in a crowd, but just the screaming aspect of it, which is performative. It's about being caught up in the hysteria around you rather than anything else. I find that makes me uncomfortable. I'm not knocking other people's right to do it, but I've never really seen the appeal of it, and I can see why it would disturb people. because it's a loss of control. And it's ultimately, I suppose, the fear is you can see there's a logical connection, even if it's a long way down the line, to the mob mentality that results in things like lynchings. Sorry, I mean, I'm not trying to conflate the two, but I'm saying that they're on a continuum, very long continuum.
Yeah. I definitely see that as a surrendering of the self, and that can be easy to manipulate. It reminds me of George Orwell, 1984, and the 3-minute hate.
Yes, exactly.
Stand in front. It might be a positive thing. Let's stand in front of this and love it for 3 minutes. But I don't want to surrender my selfhood to that extent.
I think that's a really good comparison. And again, I'm so interested in how, 50 years before social media, you can see the impact of it in a physical form where people gather in crowds. I mean, you had hysteria around Liszt, his performances, didn't you? You had the hysteria around people like Frank Sinatra and Elvis. So it's always been there as a phenomenon, a social phenomenon. But when it happens in this point in the 60s, one, it's over really fast. Sorry, normally it used to be over really fast. With the Beatles, it doesn't stop. It just keeps growing. And of course, the music is so amazing, and they themselves are such charismatic people. That's what's different. I interviewed Jim Dale, the Carry On actor who started out as a pop star on the 6-5 special. He was a huge pop star, and I remember interviewing him and him saying how much he hated the fame. The hysteria, the crowds that used to follow him, and you had to keep secret the fact that he was married with a child. And he said, I just loathed it. I loathed being a pop star. That was the reality of most pop stars in the late 50s, early 60s. And it tended to be over quite quickly. I mean, the idea was that the moment they found out you were married, they would move on. And obviously managers would, to some extent, feed that fear. But it must have been, it's a strange new invention, the pop star, and the fans that automatically go with them. So what the Beatles are doing is that it's becoming a more mature situation, isn't it, where the Beatles are growing up. To some extent, their fans are growing up with them. You have a real sense of adults adoring them as well. All the film critics who I looked at their reviews, who absolutely discover the Beatles through this film and realise how much more there is to them than what they thought. And then, of course, we know what's to come with the more sophisticated albums and the retreat from touring. But one of the joys of this film, and one of the reasons why I think it endures, is it
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Which is a reality, and that is them at their peak in the sense of they're still enjoying the touring, they're still kind of enjoying the fan hysteria. I mean, it's kind of a joke, and because there's 4 of them, they share it. It's not the lone burden of one person like it would have been for Elvis.
Yeah, I'm currently working on a biography of Sean Connery, and he said as his thing that he was as famous as the Beatles, but the Beatles had 4 of them to sort of share it with and protect each other.
So true. And you can see how troubled Sean Connery was by that particular kind of fame that came with the James Bond role, and how he desperately tried to ditch it by some of the roles he took on. I mean, amazing man. Yeah, being 4 of them made all the difference to why they were able to endure it as long as they did, and why by working collectively they could then shift a direction together and move into a different sphere.
Yeah, absolutely, and have that sort of solidarity. So going back to the film, we sort of have a part where they escape, and we have parts of genuine freedom in the film as well. Beyond, obviously, we have Ringo sort of having his detour. But I remember watching the bit where they go to a party, and you kind of see them flirting, and you see them doing things, and you really get a feeling that, again, it's that documentary. You're just seeing them sort of letting their hair down, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I think it's very interesting that it's a significant contrast to the Screaming Girls, which is how most of the public would have thought of the Beatles in relation to women. And here they are in a nightclub with women of their own age or a bit older, sort of London girls, with their own boyfriends. I mean, one, again, going back to identifying kind of cultural figures, that's Adina Ronay, the fashion designer, sitting with her lovely leather-booted leg held erotically, what do they call it, erotically cupped in her boyfriend's hand while she's talking to John. It's such a love, and she's so relaxed, So I loved moments like that, and you can't hear what they're saying. It it's really smart not to have given you any dialogue there, just to relish, as you say, watching them at play. It's like a nature documentary at this point. You're just watching the Beatles relax in an environment where they're comfortable. I did think, someone suggested that maybe this nightclub was like, you know, the Existentialists or something. I said, well, I'm not sure it is. I mean, it is ultimately played for laughs with the, is it the Jeremy Lloyd character, you know, the tall guy who's the scriptwriter of all those sitcoms, who's jumping up and down, and he and Ringo get into competitive jumping. It's very much played for laughs, where you compare that to Beatles 64, where Ringo is dancing away with, I think, Ronnie Spector at the nightclub, and those two women that he's dancing with are so beautiful and so sexy in the way only a New York girls could be. And you know, you have that real sense of sexual energy. And I think in this film, even though there are those moments with the Dina Ronnie where you feel it's genuine, a lot of it is played so much for laughs to slightly mute or earth their sexual charge, I think.
Yeah. And speaking of the Beatles as individually, each one sort of has his moment, has his time. We've had Ringo sort of go off. We have Paul with his grandfather and his other bits. John having that, you know, you mentioned that really, I think you call it the sassiest line or the most acerbic line of the film where, oh no, it's Ringo. Sorry, apologies. It's Ringo when someone says,
I fought the war for your sort.
I bet you wish you'd lost.
I bet you're sorry you won.
Yeah, that's it. Oh, God, I've got everything wrong today.
No. Well, I have written a book on it. If I didn't remember those lines, it would be me you'd be laughing at. I will point out that Paul's solo scene, because he lost, they didn't keep the scene with Isla Blair. What ends up being his solo scene is effectively when he's singing And I Love Her in the spotlight, which has an amazing effect, which is when the camera does a 360-degree rotation around him and crashes into that spotlight, so it burns out his face. And I describe, I mean, there's so much in this film which is like solar eclipses and planetary movement and alignments, the kind of shadow casting. They did it deliberately. People think, oh wow, again you've broken a rule, but they did that deliberately because they were trying to be experimental, and the extreme high contrast of that scene is also partly to mask the fact that the studio is very dirty, as Gilbert Taylor pointed out. But it is a great moment which captures Paul McCartney in kind of a way that I think is still fair, which is he is the troubadour. You know, he's the guy who writes the silly love songs and can deliver them. You know, it's lovely watching him perform it. It's a moment of musical sincerity. You know, so that's his solo spotlight moment, I would argue.
Yeah, the sincerity. Yeah, that's a good point to make, I think, for him, because he's so. I don't know. I think maybe because he has the longevity along with Ringo, there's a sense that you see him playing on Saturday Night Live now, and you sort of feel he's still doing the shtick. And it can get a little bit to the point where you're thinking, oh, I want to see the real Paul McCartney. And we saw it earlier rather than we see it now.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think he's so down to earth and so genuine and friendly that he is who he is. He's never put on a persona in that sense. I do think if you watch Beatles 64, and I recommend it, which is on Disney Plus, almost as a companion piece to Hard Day's Night, and see all those same scenarios, but see how different they are when they are just doing it because they're captured on camera. They can look at the camera. They're often hitting the clapperboard and looking at the camera and going, not you again. I mean, they are in their element when they're in a Spike Milligan-esque scenario where they can embrace the fact that the camera's there, they can break the fourth wall, deviate from the script. That's when they thrive. So there's a sense of them being slightly hemmed in by being in a fictional version of themselves, even if, as we've agreed, there are documentary moments where the camera just lets them run, like when they arrive at the TV studio. The camera's just fixed off on one side and you watch them walk into the foyer. And I've described it as like emptying a jar of stick insects, and they're all crawling off in different directions. They're all speaking at the same time. They've all got different things to say, and I actually pick out what they're all saying because they've all got great lines and they're all ad-libbing it. And then they walk up into the press conference and a new scene starts. Those moments are absolute gold. And the fact that Richard Lester knew to keep the camera running any time that they were walking into a space, that you would get something out of it that was valuable. No one else could do that, you know. I don't think. That's one of the reasons that this film stands out. No one else realised that it's the little in-between moments that actually capture the Beatles.
It's so interesting as well, that relationship they have with the media, because obviously they're kind of, in some ways, they're talking over the heads of the journalists, and because it's the journalists' generation are not buying the records yet. And it's the kids who are picking it up first, you know. So they don't really need the established media as much as the media might think they're needed, you know.
Although I think because they're all smart, educated men, they kind of want they're grown-ups now. I mean, they're in their early 20s, and they like the idea of being that the mainstream media wants to understand them and accept them, that it's not just the pop press. What I find hilarious about that news conference scene is how Richard Lester does something very pop-arty with it. So if you think about something like the famous JFK Pan Am Lounge arrival when they went to New York for the first time and they're being asked about their haircuts and stuff, there are questions like that here. But the whole way it's edited, it's sort of like a collage where you hear questions and answers floating over a burble. In fact, I think it's about 30 seconds of just burbling when they walk into the room before you actually pick out anything. It's almost like speech bubbles turned into visual representation. And then there's a sense of mismatched question and answer where every question Paul's asked, his answer is no, we're just good friends. Do you often see your father? No, actually, we're just good friends. I mean, it doesn't make sense. And so it's completely undermining the very idea of the press conference, which some contemporary reviewers really enjoyed. And also, to be fair, some of the best, most understanding journalists at the time were older people. I mean, I'd not seen probably Maureen Cleave was old. She was probably a couple of years older, or maybe about the same age as them. But she really understood what the Beatles represented. She helped improve the lyrics of A Hard Day's Night. So one of the things they talk about in my chapter on women is that the women and journalists in this are represented as being a bit dim and easily shockable. But actually, in reality, women journalists were some of the most important to establishing the Beatles in the mainstream. I mean, the photographer, is it Fiona Adams, who took the great jumping pictures, which arguably inspire the Can't Buy Me Love leaping sequences, if you think about her cover for Twist and Shout. Maureen Cleave is another. Really, there's a great quote from Maureen Cleave. She interviewed a Liverpool housewife who said they're depraved in the nicest possible way, which is such a great quote. And that is what this one captures, don't you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think as well that press conference, it reminds me of the Godard Breathless scene where Gene Seberg is interviewing Jean-Pierre Merville at the airport, and he's coming out with just French philosophical sound bites.
That's such a great comparison, yeah.
I want to live forever and then die. I can imagine Ringo saying that.
Yeah, well, again, you see, we talk about the fact that three of them were grammar school boys. Ringo, obviously, schooling was very different because he was ill so much at the time. But he's the one who comes up with the really clever wordplay. He's the one who comes up with A Hard Day's Night.
Yeah, right.
8 days a week and all these great sayings that have a cryptic possibility. And then they, so I just love the idea that it's essential that you understand only the four of them could have been the Beatles. And one of the great discoveries to me is I'd talked to Joel Morris, the fantastic comedy writer, and his book, Be Funny or Die, which is such a great book, is a citation because when he came on Front Row to talk about it, he talked about this formula of the sitcom. And we talked about the relationship between the film and Wilfrid Bramble and sitcoms in general. And of course, Richard Lester knew British comedy very well. But essentially, the Beatles are a sitcom family. They're the patriarch, matriarch, craftsman and clown. Not to say that Ringo is just a clown. It's much more sophisticated than that. But once you realise that they actually fit this archetype, it helps explain why they're so good and why, as Joel pointed out, the Beatles weren't the Beatles until they had Ringo, till they had their clown.
Absolutely. Oh, that's so. I mean, I love that observation in the book, and it makes me think as well of Help, where they all go into the doors of what looks like a row of houses, and it's the same house.
Well, I mean, there's a whole, Monkeys sitcom created entirely in that template. Yeah, it's a lovely
absolutely.
Image, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. It's so good, and it strikes, I think, such a young person's fantasy of what a rock band should be. Is like, yes, of course, you should all live together and be great friends and all the rest of it.
Yeah, am I right in thinking that in Help, in that he has that sort of Italian sunken garden style bed surrounded by books. Are all the books copies of In His Own Right?
Oh, that would be a very good ironic joke if it was. That would be that sounds very typically John.
Well, someone pointed out to me the other day, which is my failure for not noticing it, is that when in A Hard Day's Night they walk into the dressing room where Dougie Millins, their sort of a tailor, is waiting with the tape measure, you can see there's a couple of copies of In His Own Right on the shelf behind him, so there's a bit of product placement.
Oh, that's so good. That's like scattering books on the coffee table before you invite a friend
Robert
around.
Rodriguez pointed that out to me, actually. Yeah, I know.
What do you make of? Well, I mean, I know you mention it in the book, but I'd like for our listeners to hear about it as well. The Magical Mystery Tour was one of those weird experiments, which is sort of when they were in their Ruttles era of money can't buy you love. Well, what is it, where they're giving all the money
All
away?
you need is cash.
Yeah, that's it. All you need is cash. They were in that sort of period of their career, and things went very wrong. But at the same time, it's kind of a strangely compelling film to watch.
It is compelling now. Can I do a little bit of a sort of thing and just say our latest episode of Through the Square Window is all about the Beatles television shows, and we include A Hard Day's Night. We include Magical Mystery Tour in it. So there's, if you want more, there's more there. But I think what's so interesting about it is that it is actually, the older you get, the better it looks as a piece of art house cinema. It's only about 75 minutes long. It's not even an hour and a half. It doesn't outstay its welcome. There is a sort of coherence. They all gather, they get on a coach and they're going on a Magical Mystery Tour, and they end up in a big hangar. And that's it. And along the way, there are some, the songs in this are amazing. Some of the visual treatments are really interesting. And particularly there's a great surreal sequence, which I mentioned in my book, which is Voyage of Brunel, which is when Aunt Jessie's having a dream about food, and John is the waiter just piling food on a plate and making her eat it, and people are walking out of a lift onto tables, and it's obviously a dream that's been turned into a piece of film, and there moments like that are just fascinating. But and also once you realise the Bonzos are in that film, it's the Bonzos are the band playing when the stripper is stripping. As an adult now, I can say the stripper is actually doing quite a fascinating strip of its era. They filmed that sequence in Raymond's Revue Bar, Paul Raymond place. So, again, I'm quite interested in, once you start to work out what's socially going on, who are these people, where have they come from, what else are they doing? It's much more interesting. As you say, you get an insight into the experimental world they're moving through. And there's a kind of naivety about them. I think Motley Fool made some of their costumes. And if you go to the Beatles story, they had some statistics on how much things cost. And the wizard outfits that are made, which is I would argue, the only embarrassing sequence in A Hard Day's Night, truly embarrassing, is when they're all pretending to be wizards in what looks like a school chemistry lab, and they're playing around and they're being silly. And it just goes on too long. And you think, this is not the funny ad-libbing, this is just embarrassing. Those costumes cost a huge amount of money. I think they were made by the Motley Fool bunch of Dutch charlatans.
Oh, right. Right, there you go.
Who made clothes for the Apple boutique.
Yeah. All you need is cash, indeed.
Yeah.
Ivor Cutler is also in that film, and he's my favourite Scottish poet.
He plays Buster Bloodvessel, who has a romance with Aunt Jessie. I thought the actress playing Aunt Jessie was also fascinating. I mean, I really like the way that she and Ringo from the word go are just arguing with each other. And again, if you think, compare it to Hard Day's Night, Ringo's very good at he's almost self-consciously saying, right, I'm going to do my argumentative voice and I'll start picking out, oh, come on, why are you sitting there? What are you sitting down for? It doesn't quite make sense. And yet when you watch him do it with her, the two of them just riff off each other beautifully. He was I don't know if he'll ever act again, but he was such a great actor.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's a funny one, because he had a real career on the screen, and
That'll Be the Day. My God, it's such a dark film. Such a dark film.
Absolutely.
Well, one of the things I speculate about, and I try to source it and I find a citation, is that apparently the reason he didn't do the sequel, Stardust, the role that Adam Faith played, was because the plot of the sequel took it into that territory of them getting rid of a drummer, and it all felt too close to the Pete Best story, supposedly.
So it's still too sensitive.
Well, apparently so, yeah. I mean, I suppose it would have been 10 years since it had happened. Less than 10 years if it was 75 Stardust, isn't it?
It's so amazing how quick the Beatles were, in the sense that, somebody says we need a title song for the film, and they've written it the next
overnight,
day.
Yeah.
But also in the sense they went from besuited, young men chatting in black and white to dressed as wizards in chemistry labs. And that's such a squash. That development happens so quickly.
Yeah, I do wonder. I know that it's all part of the story of who they are, but not so much the pot. If they hadn't had, it was their dentist who slipped LSD into their coffee at a dinner party, which is an outrageous thing to have done out in the burbs. If they hadn't tried LSD, I wonder what direction they would have taken, because I suspect that's the gateway moment and then John starts taking heroin and gets into much darker stuff. And I think LSD, from what Cynthia's written about it was and I think Patty Boyd as well, it wasn't a great experience for many people. And I suspect that's the point where it all starts to splinter for them, and in their relationships as well.
There's a film I saw very recently at Cannes, Steven Soderbergh actually, to connect it to something we were talking about earlier, which is about John Lennon's last interview. And I think it might just be called John Lennon, The Last Interview. And it's it's the interview he gave on the day that he was shot by Mark Chapman. It talks to the people who actually did the interview, but the bulk of the film is made up of John Lennon just talking, just the tapes, almost sort of like uncut, you know.
Was this the BBC interview or was this the Rolling Stone interview?
This was the Rolling Stone interview.
Right.
You know, Annie Leibovitz is upstairs taking a photograph of him before the interview begins, and he's coming downstairs and he's, oh, I'm sorry I'm late, you know, and Yoko's already been talking to the interviewers for some time. The problem with the film is Soderbergh has decided to illustrate it with photographs in a fairly conventional way, but then use AI to illustrate some of the things that John Lennon is saying. And this is abhorrent. It's an abomination.
How? So what, will the photographs animate then through AI?
No, it's see, that's what I was thinking. When I heard about it, I thought, oh, well, he'll animate the photographs or he'll make something to just bring it to life a little bit. But no, what he does is, so Lennon will say something like, oh, in the 60s, we were like babies crying because we weren't given what we wanted. And it will cut to babies dressed in 60s paraphernalia crying in New York streets or in rooms with lava lamps or something.
I see. That's a strange choice.
And you'll
it's
just
an artistic choice, I suppose.
Yeah, but the whole point of the interview is he's talking about authenticity throughout. The whole thing is, I've been a Beatle, I've been a this, I've been a that, and now I want everyone to see that I'm a husband, I'm a father. That's what I am. That's my authentic self. And I've treated people terribly, and I've been a really nasty person sometimes. And now I just want to be honest with people. And as he's saying this, you've just got AI slop just you know, boiling through the screen.
How did it go down at the screening then? Did it go down badly?
I don't think so. I don't think there was there wasn't a revolt, but the vast amount of people I talked to just said, I closed my eyes and listened to the film because it just felt like such a contradiction, you know.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, everybody groaned at the very beginning because it said right at the very beginning, presented by Meta.
No.
Yeah, like a Meta production or presented by Meta or something was like the first title card. So at that point, there was a groan that went through the, you know. But there's sort of been a history of that as well. Like Apple, I remember selling the iPod on the basis that you can own the entire Beatles discography for $100 or something.
And to be fair, I mean, Paul McCartney had spoken very honestly about how AI has been useful to some of the work they've done on those singles, haven't they? I mean, they use that on Now and Then. What's the latest one? The last one that they had a scrap of John Lennon track and they turned it into a...
Was it something like First Love or...
I can't remember. I know Now and Then was a year or two ago. There was another one since. So as long as you're upfront about it, I think you can use it as a tool. But yeah, no, I'm not sure how John Lennon would have felt about Meta. I suspect he would have been quite negative.
Yeah, it just felt a bit dissonant, and it also felt that the visuals weren't that good. You know, it wasn't that good a thing. Sorry to slag off Mr. Soderbergh.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? Well, in contrast, I would say Richard Linklater's film Nouvelle Vague about how they made Breathless is such a charming watch. It's utterly lovely.
Beautiful. And also I'd argue that, and I'm sure he's not beyond using AI occasionally, Peter Jackson's Get Back reuse of the Let It Be footage, I found a revelation when
and they did a huge amount on the audio, didn't they? I mean, that was key, cleaning up those tapes. And also, I mean, obviously his trial run, which again, I mention it in the book, is the fact that he'd worked on that World War I footage, which I think is relevant to when you watch this film. There's a sense of these young men who are no longer young, you know, and they shall not grow old.
That's very interesting. And to go back to where we started, as we close the conversation, my daughters re-watch Get Back like every so often. That's one of their re-watch films. They'll say,
how long is it? How many hours is it?
But where there's a binge generation, so they need something they can binge So yeah, it's about 3 hours, isn't it? Like
No, each
maybe
episode is a couple of hours, isn't it? So
yeah, I think it's about 6 hours. I think it's
Yeah.
yeah, that sounds right. But they love it. And I'm quite happy to sit and watch it with them. I'll tell you the truth.
Oh, I can't. I think I would find it hard to watch again the bit where George and John leave and Paul is crying, and
Yeah,
also when
that's hard.
James comes in and boasts about how he's selling his part of the catalogue and they never had a chance to buy it back themselves. It makes me want to put. I feel myself clenching it with fury. You know,
Going through the screen and grabbing them.
yeah.
Well, listen, Samira, it's been so great talking to you. It's such a wonderful book. I really enjoyed reading it. I advise everyone to get your copy and go into it. But I have one final question to ask you, which is, have you got a recommended film book for us?
Yeah, I do, and it's one that's a big citation in my book, and I recommend it. It's Alexander Walker's Hollywood, England, which was published in 1974, and it was his history of the British film industry in the 1960s. So he did a lot of really good interviews with people who'd worked on A Hard Day's Night, but also all the other big films of the 60s. And he makes a great claim, which is, again, something I quote in my book, which is the three greatest films, British films in the 1960s, are A Hard Day's Night, If, and Performance. Performance was made in 1969, even if it wasn't released until 1970. And once you think of that as this triumvirate of great cinema, I think that's a wonderful starting point. He actually wrote a trilogy of books about the British film industry, taking it right through to the early 2000s, I think. I think the last volume came out posthumously. But I recommend them all. But Hollywood, England is great, and I'm pretty sure it's been reissued. So fascinating. If you love British cinema and you want to know what was going on in the 60s and why it's such a remarkable decade, that's the book.
Yeah. No, I second that. I second that emotion. Absolutely, absolutely cracking read, and I just love that period as well. I think there's so much going on. There's so much going on which feels new and vibrant and is often overlooked.
Yeah, exactly. And just getting that sense of television at its peak, advertising is fascinating, how fast Britain is changing. I mean, I was recording an interview for the DVD extras of Billy Liar, which has got a 4K restoration, which is coming out in August. And it looks so beautiful. And I forgot how that film opens, which is, the camera zooming along a street, looking at all these suburban houses and flats, and the music of Housewives' Choice is playing, and this sense of post-war Britain and the kind of complacency they're trying to push people into, but people are trying to break out of it. It's all there in the opening seconds. Even if you didn't know what Housewife's Choice was, you have a sense of it. This is a period piece, but also you think the impact that film had on release. That's the biggest thing, like A Hard Day's Night, these films that have a double impact. They have the impact they would have had on release, and they have the impact that resonates through the decades. That is timeless.
That's so true. I love that film. It's all happening, says the comedian all the way through it as well.
Of course, I have a big comparison, which is that Billy Liar is kind of the John Lennon who never gets on the train to London. Don't forget, he and the Rodney Bewes character, they write a song which is performed at the Locarno, lyrics by Crabtree and Fisher.
Right.
So they are the Lennon and McCartney.
It all connects, doesn't it? I was in Bologna recently and watched a remastered version of Whistle Down the Wind, which is a film I watched as a child and have never seen since. And it's so good. And to hear those northern accents, me being from Cumbria, to hear those northern accents, genuine.
The genius of setting it there, because it's based on a novel written by Hayley Mills's mother, which it was set in the Southwest, and Brian Thornton made the decision to relocate it to the North, where it was still convincing that in the early 60s that you could have a religious community which was so cut off that they would see a man in the thing as maybe it's Jesus. And I interviewed Hayley Mills. We did a screening at the BFI, and I interviewed Hayley Mills at it, and it was so beautiful watching it with her and talking to her about that film. It's magical the way that you see the children dancing in silhouette over the hill when they think they found Jesus.
Yeah, the Three Kings.
The Three Kings,
exactly. So good.
Yeah.
I love the little boy saying, "It's not Jesus, it's just some fella." Brilliant. Well, again, once more, Samira, thank you so much for joining me. I will put a link to the book and your work on the pod.
Would you also mention, can I mention that if you go to my website, samiraahmed.blog, there is a page upcoming where I list all the upcoming cinema screenings where I'm doing in conversations and book signings, and also all the literary festivals. I'm doing quite a few, including at Cheltenham, talking to the historian David Kynaston, whose new book is about Britain, 1965 to 66, and we're doing a joint event. So it's 64 to 66, and what's
amazing!
happening.
I love his work.
Yeah.
I love his work. I love the covers of the all of his histories. They all have these sort of strange, sort of like old-fashioned covers as well, which are just perfect.
But I'm doing a lot of events around the country, including screenings in places like Brighton, Manchester, Liverpool. I'm doing a big screening at Liverpool University, and lots of book festivals. So if you're not in London, honestly, be assured there is somewhere we are coming to a cinema near you.
Yeah, Liverpool's my old alma mater. I was there for... do we say alma mater in English? In England?
Yeah, we do.
Oh, is it an American thing? Oh, we do. Okay, good. I was there for 9 years. I was in Liverpool. So I got... I lived round the corner from where Paul McCartney was born, and over walking across where strawberry fields were and all that sort of stuff.
Fantastic.
So yeah, bus stop at Penny Lane. Wonderful stuff. So thank you. Great. Lovely talking to you, Samira. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Most people don't realize how much of their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making billions pulling details about you from public records and the internet, then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance. All backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might just sell credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of that together at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/prevent. Protect yourself now at aura.com/prevent.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.